Good morning, good afternoon, Mr. Chaffee.
Hi, Mr. Chang. How are you?
I'm well, thank you. How are you doing?
Okay. Looks like we're both bright and early, huh?
Yes, we are.
You know, I didn't notice on the DOH website whether a public YouTube link had been put out for this.
It may not have got, we set up that notice before the live streaming was set up.
Okay.
So it probably did not reflect that.
Okay. Okay.
No one has contacted me, however. I think we asked that if people wanted to get info to contact me, and I have not received any direct requests other than through councils.
Okay. I think I'll put myself on mute. Working from home, I have people stirring about and getting ready for their day.
Sure, no problem. Thank you.
Thanks.
What? Got it. Stop video for now. I'm going to change this plugin. Rename to your full name.
Yeah, and then do a read.
Good morning, Jay. Welcome.
Morning. Hey, Kimo.
Chemo's not on yet. This is Lou.
Oh, I see him.
Oh, I don't, yeah, I don't see him in. Only maybe it's the iPad.
Yes. I think it says iPad 6.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. He's in the waiting room as well. Let him in. Hey, good morning, Kimo.
Morning. Morning, Mr. Chang. My name is Sharon. I'm the court reporter today.
Okay, good morning. Thank you for helping us.
Sure.
Sharon, I'm sure you are aware, parties are hoping to be able to get a transcript, I think, by Friday.
Yeah, that shouldn't be a problem. I mean, unless we were to go into the evening or something happened, but
I don't expect that.
not a problem.
Yeah. Okay, very good.
And I got some of the prior transcripts from Donna to get a little bit of familiarity with what's going on.
And do you want to check in when everybody checks in? You want to check in as to who wants copies?
Yeah, we can do that beforehand or after, either way.
Okay. Okay, let me know if you need anything, anything's not working and stuff.
Great, thank you so much.
Sharon, we will primarily be receiving the testimony of a Dr. Nicole DeNovio, DENOVIO.
Okay, looks like she was volume 5. Okay, great.
Okay.
Thank you. What would be helpful, I'm not sure who's going to speak, but for the people who will be speaking today, if their identification, if they could actually have their name.
On the screen?
Yeah, that'll be that'll be helpful so I can actually see who's speaking and they won't have to continually identify themselves.
Okay.
So that's going to be a problem for me, and I might be doing some speaking. I have Zoom issues, so I'm using my iPad to do the visual and my computer to do the audio, and there's no way I'm technologically competent enough to be able to figure out how on my iPad to change my name from iPad 6. But this is David Frankel, and my name is somewhere up there on the gallery.
Okay, so it looks like what's happening, David, is when you're speaking, I can see you and it says iPad 6, but when you're speaking, your name actually does come through. That's what seems to be happening.
Okay.
So that'll be okay. Because
Okay.
yes, when you're speaking, it looks like your voice is coming through and there's a green image or a green line highlighting your name. So I think we'll be fine with that then.
Okay, good.
Hello, Hearing Officer Chang. This is Erwin Kawata, Board of Water Supply.
Hi, Mr. Kawata. Welcome.
Thank you. Put myself on mute.
Okay.
Hey, Chemo, I'm no expert myself, but I think if you push on the little icon that shows, that'll allow you to rename. So it's the little circle figure of a person. You touch that.
I understand what you're saying, but I see no icon. Oh, there it is. Huh. Let's see if I can play with that. No, no, I don't.
Or go to the list of participants, then click it there.
Oh, okay.
May I ask who is coming in as Wogai Momand?
Hearing Officer Chang, that's Uge Momand. She's with our Board of Water Supply legal team with Morgan
Okay.
Lewis.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Hearing Officer Chang, can you please confirm that you can hear me?
Yes, Dr. Denovio can hear you fine. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning, Jeff.
Morning, hearings officer. Morning, everyone.
And Marnie Riddle is joining us.
Good morning.
Good morning. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Good. I think we are waiting for Jonathan McKay and Ella Gagnon.
Ella.
Oh, okay, good. So, Ms. Gagnon, are you going to be sharing a microphone with Dr. Denovio?
That's correct. Can you hear me?
All right. Yes, coming in good.
Yeah, I just won't show up as a speaker, but that's okay.
The court reporter will need to know that. Court reporter has asked that, people identify themselves, and if you're not shown on the screen, then we'll need to make sure she's clear about that.
Certainly, I'll be aware.
Okay. Okay, Jonathan McKay is joining us.
And could I get, this is the court reporter, could I get clarity on who is sitting with our witness today again?
Ella Gagnon.
Thank you.
Is anyone awaiting anyone else to join us? It's still a couple minutes early.
The board has everyone.
Okay, and the Navy.
I think so, yes.
All right. So, Ms. Koski, most people are identified, so you're going to be okay in terms of knowing who all is speaking. But if you have a problem, just give a shout and we'll address it.
I think we'll be fine. The only person I see not identified is from AECom, but if they don't speak, it's not going to be a problem.
Okay, and I'm not anticipating that you'll speak, and that would be Frank Cioffi, Cioffi.
Great.
That's correct. I don't anticipate speaking.
Okay. And I'm ready to go whenever you are, Mr. Hearings Officer.
All right, let me make a quick check, make sure our live streaming is working okay. Here, so, all right, why don't we begin? Thank you, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon. We should have appearances for the participating parties. So may I have appearances first, perhaps from the Navy first?
This is Marnie Riddle for the Navy. I'll be cross-examining Dr. Denovio today. And also present are Karin Minot, John McKay, Michael Law.
All right, very good, thank you. And for the Board of Water Supply?
Good afternoon or good morning, Hearing Officer Chang. This is Ella Foley-Gannon with Morgan Lewis on behalf of the Board of Water Supply. I have with me David Brown and Uge Monat, as well as Jeff Lau from the City and County of Honolulu, and Erwin Kawada from the Board of Water Supply is also present.
All right, very good, thank you. And then for the Sierra Club?
David Frankel here for the Sierra Club. And by the way, it looks like John McKay disappeared.
Okay. Well, let's give him a moment to come back on.
Real quick, Ms. Gannon, could you change your identification so I can see your name when you're speaking?
You're muted.
Sorry. The problem is we need to share one mic because if we both have our mics on, since we're sitting in the same room, you will get feedback.
Okay.
So that is the problem, but I can make sure I identify myself every time I speak if that is helpful.
No, I understand what's going on now. That's fine. No problem.
Okay. And for the EHA, Mr. Page.
Good morning, Deputy Attorney General James Page for EHA. Also in the room with me are client representatives Phoenix Grange, Joanna Sito, Roxanne Kwan, and Lene Ichinotsubo.
All right, very good, thank you. Now we have Dr. Nicole Denovio present. I think we've got everyone, so we can begin the reopened hearing. Any administrative issues that anybody wants to raise before we take testimony? Whoever is trying to speak is not coming through, so I was just asking if there were any admin scheduling concerns that people wanted to raise before we take testimony.
This is John. I'm sorry, I had a terrible internet connection, so I had to dial in by phone. I'm going to just let it stall out and stay on the phone.
I'm sorry,
Okay.
John, who was just speaking?
John McKay.
This is John McKay with the Navy.
Thank you.
All right. Any comments? We're here to receive the testimony of Dr. DeNovio. We can proceed with that if everyone's ready.
All right. Thank you for coming back on the record, Dr. Novio.
All right. Let's make sure she's sworn.
Yes, sorry.
And I'd like to do it direct too, briefly.
Dr. DeNovio, would you take your oath, please? Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you present at this hearing will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
All right. Thank you very much. Ms. Gagnon.
Thank you. Yes, again, this is Ella Gannon on behalf of the water supply. Dr. DeNovio, can you briefly summarize the supplemental testimony that you have recently provided in this proceeding?
Yes, thank you. So I reviewed the data and emails and information in the record associated with the May 6th event at the Red Hill Bulk Fuel Storage Facility. Based on that information, I noted that there was a release from the fuel supply line associated with tank 20, that release resulted in fuel in the lower access tunnel. The lower access tunnel was cleaned or attempted to be cleaned by the Navy, and that despite that cleaning, that there's some amount of fuel of unknown quantity that has been released to the environment. I know this based on review of the information of the soil vapor probes. We see elevated or pronounced spikes of soil vapor readings at tanks 20, 17, 18, and 15 and 16 in particular. And that these spikes are based on the record that occurred between 4 and about a week afterwards, because there was a time delay between when the release occurred and when the soil vapor probes were accessed and sampled. So based on that information, the fuel from the tunnel was not contained in the tunnel, and the soil vapor probes indicate that fuel was released to the environment.
I'm sorry, that broke up. Indicate what?
That fuel was released to the environment.
Thank you. And did you prepare figures that were submitted along with your testimony?
Yes, I did.
And can we pull up those figures?
I will do my best. Let's share my screen.
Okay, can do it.
It's okay. I think I've got it.
Okay, so screen share has been set up. If you can share, that's fine. Also, I can do it if you need me to do it.
Okay, I think I should be okay. Just give me 1 second here. Okay, share, figure, share. Okay, I'm hoping that you can see figure 1 from my testimony.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
And do you have any, before we go through this, do you have any corrections or revisions to make to these figures or to your testimony?
Just to the figures. So on this figure 1, you'll note that I made this revision 1. I noticed when I PDF'd the figure for tank 17 that the yellow line was not indicated. So the yellow line that you can see in this figure should be marked SV17S as it's shown here, which indicates soil vapor probe at tank 17 shallow. There's one other minor change, which is to the title that reads tank 17, 18, and 20 soil vapor concentration history, February to May 2021.
And is there any revisions to any of the other figures?
Yeah, to figure 2, there's a revision Again, just a simple revision to the title. It should read tanks 15 and 16 soil vapor concentration history, February to May 2021.
Okay, so those corrections again were just to clarify what the L line meant for tank 17, and then just to make sure that the title, the date in the title was reflective of the graphs. Is that correct?
That's right.
Okay, thank you. And can you just briefly walk through what these figures show?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. So each one of these figures reflects the soil vapor probe PID readings from the selected tanks. So the top figure is tanks 17, 18, and then 20 in figure 1. These were grouped because of the keeping a consistent y-axis. The points shown on the figure are the measurements associated with each one of the previous sampling events, and then the events that occurred, the sampling events that occurred after the May 6th spill. The May 6th spill is shown on these figures as a black vertical dashed line. And so you can see both the timing and location of each one of the probes from the figure. So one of the things to indicate here is that about a week after this May 6th event, tanks 17, 18, and 20 were sampled at the soil vapor probes. And you can see initial concentrations in many of the probes are much higher than the baseline condition that occurred previously. So the baseline condition was in most of these probes was around 150, maybe 200. And then after the event, concentrations varied. And you can see that in each one of the figures. Obviously, tank 20 has the highest concentration in that red line, but you see high concentrations based on those PID readings a bit later at tank 17 and earlier at tank 20 and tank 18. In figure 2, again, same sort of information here, where we have the low concentrations associated with the pre-event, and you can see those for February and April, and then the May 6th spill that occurred in that black dashed line, and then the variable soil vapor probe measurements that occurred after the May 6th event. You can see it's a very different sort of range than what occurred before.
What is the approximate distance of like tank 15 and 16 from tank 20?
It's around 350 to 400 feet. It depends on exactly where you're measuring from.
Thank you.
So quite a distance.
And did you prepare any other figures?
I did. Let's see if I could switch. Are you able to see now figure 3?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. So figure 3 shown here is a compilation of the data that was in the record. So the April data from each one of the soil vapor probes, the way to read this is the tank position is up in the left-hand corner and is repeated along the top line. So tank 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. And then for each one of the soil vapor probes associated with that tank is read across the line. So the shallow is the first line after the tank position, medium, the next line, and deep, the last line. And so the measured concentrations that were in the record associated with the April sampling event, so this is kind of the baseline before the May 6th release, are shown on the left. And what you can see is the concentrations for the most part range in that 100 to 200 range. There's a couple that are higher, about 1,000 prior to the May 6th release. Then the next column over, so the center column, are the peak concentrations that were in the record associated with the May 6th release. That those peak concentrations occur at variable times because as we saw from the figure 1 and figure 2, the timing of the peak is different depending on which tank and which soil vapor probe location. And so I've recorded the date of each one of those high concentrations in the table, so you can directly reference it. And so in this case, you can see that if previously we had concentrations in the 100 to 200 range at most of them, now concentrations are ranging from almost 700 to as high as 162,000.
I'm sorry, repeat that number again.
As high as 162,000. And then the final column over to the right just summarizes the information in the previous 2 columns as the multipliers from one to the next. So you can see how much higher the concentrations were after the May 6th event compared to the sampling that occurred, the routine sampling that occurred in April. And so you can see that concentrations are about 3 times to as much as or just a little bit more than 1,300 times greater than what was observed previously.
Thank you. And do you have one more figure that you submitted?
Yes, I do. And so that's figure 4, which I'm hoping everyone can see.
We can.
Okay, perfect. And the only change here is the bottom to my previous testimony is to this bottom purple circle, which is shown in the legend as well as the tank 20 supply piping. And that just reflects the May 6th release that occurred that we're talking about today.
So you added one release to this is what we had previously referred to as the bubble chart during the last hearing. Is that correct?
That's right.
And you just added the May 6th release to that chart.
Yes, that's right.
Thank you. With that, we would ask that her written testimony corrected, and we will supply corrected figures to everybody to reflect what we just discussed. But we ask that that testimony be accepted into the record, and we will offer Dr. DeNovio for cross-examination.
All right, thank you. There being no objections, it's accepted. Ms. Riddle, would you like to begin across?
Yes, thank you. Thanks again for coming back on the record. I'm going to try to share my screen and bring up a page from exhibit B352. Let's see. Can everybody see that diagram?
Yes.
All right. This is a page from exhibit B352. It's labeled figure 2-8 soil vapor monitoring point construction details. And it can be found on page 65 of the PDF version of B352. Dr. Novio, have you seen this diagram before?
Yes, I have.
Does this diagram appear to be a schematic of the soil vapor monitoring points at Red Hill?
Yes, that's my understanding.
At the top left of the diagram, do you see the shape labeled Red Hill UST typical?
Yes.
At the top right of the diagram, do you see the label, the concrete tunnel wall?
Yes, I do.
At the middle right of the diagram, do you see the line labeled floor?
Yes.
Do you understand that to indicate the floor of the lower access tunnel?
That's how I understand it, yes.
Okay. Switch to a page from exhibit B25. This is the top part of page 38 of the PDF version of exhibit B25. It's labeled photo number 37. And the comment to the left of the photo reads, cover for soil vapor monitoring wells. Dr. DeNovio, have you seen this photo before?
Yes.
Are you aware that the soil vapor monitoring points are accessed from the tunnels at Red Hill?
That was my understanding, yes, that it's in the floor of the tunnel.
Have you ever been inside one of the tunnels at Red Hill?
No, I have not.
Going to switch to another exhibit. Okay, gonna have to zoom in a little bit on this one. This is PDF page 335 of the Navy's supplemental exhibit package that was filed on May 27th, 2021. And this page is located in exhibit N-174A. The top table is labeled average soil vapor concentration readings (paren ppbv), close paren, and it appears to show the soil vapor concentrations in the shallow, medium, and deep monitoring points indicated here by the letters S, M, and D for each of the soil vapor monitoring points sampled from May 10th to May 25th, 2021. Have you seen this table before?
Yes, I have.
Is this the table that contains the data on which your graphs of soil vapor concentrations in May 2021 at tanks 15 and 16 are based?
So these are the, so I know that there were a number of different tables. I am not absolutely positive that I have not compared every single table that was in all of the testimony to confirm that they have all the exact same values. But yes, that was the intent. If this is the one master table, I do know that there's one that's shaded as well that I believe contains the same information.
Okay, but assuming that this represents accurate data that's up to date, it's basically the same data that you base the graphs on?
Right, except that it doesn't have the April data.
Okay, sure. Understood.
Or February data for that matter.
Okay, but this is the data that the right section of your graphs showing readings that occurred after the May 6th release.
Yes, that's right.
Thank you. All right, the bottom table on that same page is labeled background tunnel air readings, paren ppbv, close paren. And it appears to show the vapor concentrations in tunnel air at or near each of the numbered tanks that were sampled from May 10th to May 25th. Do you agree that this is what the table shows?
That's right.
Okay. And these aren't labeled with the substance being measured, unfortunately, but do you understand that these are concentrations of volatile organic compounds?
I understand that they are PID readings, which are photoionization detector readings.
Of volatile organic compounds or of some other substance?
Yes, of volatile organic compounds. Generally are what's measured with a PID.
Okay, thank you. All right, could you please review the column in the bottom tunnel table, sorry, the tunnel air readings that's labeled tank 16?
I'm sorry, I can't actually see them. They're much too small for me to be able to read.
Let me zoom in for everybody. Okay. So that's
Ms. Riddle, I'm sorry to interrupt you. Can I check with Jonathan McKay? He is having trouble. We're dropping him and he's having to come back in repeatedly. I want to just check in that he's okay with what's going on, or does he want us to hold on the examination until he is reconnected and the like?
No, I'm connected by phone. We can proceed. I'm actually going to try to just switch to the YouTube to see the video.
Okay, all right, fine, thank you. Ms. Riddle, please continue.
all right. Can you see the column labeled tank 16 now?
Yes, I can, thank you.
All right. Okay. Let's see if we can do this What I'd like you to do is compare the values in the tank 16 column on the bottom table with the values in the top table. But I don't know if I'll be able to get them both on screen at the same time in a way that everyone can see them both. Let me see. Excuse me. So there's the values in the top table for the 3 soil vapor monitoring points. At the tank 16 soil vapor monitoring port. Can you review those briefly for me?
I can.
Okay, the values in the tunnel air column in the bottom table labeled tank 16 are higher than the values in the soil vapor columns labeled SV 16, SM, and D. Is that correct? I can go back if you want.
You know, this is a lot of data to commit to memory and compare 2 tables to one another on. So I could look at this in hard copy and answer your question more directly. Generally, I saw that the concentrations in the tunnel appear to be higher than the ones in the soil vapor monitoring probes. But beyond that, without having this printed in front of me, it's impossible for me to answer more specifically than that.
Sure. Okay. Then let's just go with the top line of each table, just as an example. On May 10th, the first day for which either of these tables has data, I can go over to the left here so you can see that the top white row there is labeled May 10th, 2021. I'm going to scroll back over to the tank 16 column. And you can see that the tunnel air reading at tank 16 on that day was 10,300 ppbv. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's what I see.
Okay. And on May 10th, the readings for, get over there, SV 16S, M, and D were 219, 142, and 109 ppbv respectively. Is that correct?
Yes.
And this data indicates that the concentration of volatile fuel constituents in the tunnel air at tank 16 on May 10th was at least an order of magnitude higher than the concentrations at the soil vapor monitoring points marked SV 16, SM, and D on the same day. Is that correct?
Yes, that's right.
All right. If you could take a look at the column for tank 15, the tunnel air reading on May 10th at tank 15 was 8,200 ppbv. Is that correct?
Yes, that's right.
And going back up to the top table, on May 10th, the readings for SV15S and SV15D were 432 and 184 ppbv respectively. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And this data indicates that the concentration of volatile fuel constituents, or VOCs, in the tunnel air at tank 15 on May 10th was at least an order of magnitude higher than the concentrations at the soil vapor monitoring points marked SV15S and SV15D on the same day. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
Is it possible that the elevated soil vapor readings at SV15 and SV16 are due to the infiltration of tunnel air carrying a high concentration of VOCs into the soil vapor monitoring points?
Yeah, I think it's very unclear what the mechanism is for the release of fuel to the environment in this case. And we don't really have information that tells us how it got to the environment, but we can tell that the soil vapor monitoring probes over quite a long time, several weeks, are indicating the presence and persistence of concentrations that indicate fuel or fuel constituents. So the direct mechanism between tunnel air, soil vapor probe tubing, it is unclear to me, but that there is a very persistent concentration of those constituents in the environment.
Is there any information indicating that it's not possible that the elevated soil vapor readings at SP 15 and 16 are due to the infiltration of tunnel air?
I don't think that we have that type of information, but it does not change the conclusion that the constituents are in the environment and in the rock mass sampled by the soil vapor probes.
Are you able to tell from this data whether the fuel that has been picked up by the soil vapor monitoring points is in liquid or gas form?
No, I can't tell.
I'd like to look at the charts that you pulled up earlier that are appended to your supplemental testimony, marked as B404, which I'll try to zoom in on here, and B405. All right. We went over this a little bit before, but the y-axis of the three charts here on this page on exhibit B404, it indicates concentrations in ppbV, and it's marked in increments of 50,000. Is that correct?
Yes, that's right.
So for the bottom chart, just as an example, the readings in SV20M, which you've marked in red here, start after, looks like May 12th, 2021 over here. That right-hand group of data points, that red line, whoops, that red line starts somewhere between 200,000 and 250,000 ppbV, and then drops to below or about 50,000 ppbV after a couple days of sampling. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. Going down to exhibit B405. The y-axis of these two charts on exhibit B405 also indicates concentrations in ppbV, right?
Yes, that's right.
And unlike the y-axis in the previous exhibit, this y-axis is marked in increments of 250, correct?
Yes, that's right.
Okay, so this shows that the data points on the right-hand side of this chart after the estimated time of the spill, the readings for tank 15 look like they're mostly under about 1,000, and the readings for tank 16 are mostly under around 750 ppbV. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. If you had graphed the readings for the soil vapor monitoring points at tanks 15 and 16 on the same y-axis that you used to graph the readings at 17, 18, and 20, what would that look like?
You wouldn't be able to see them. They would just look like a wiggle on the x-axis. These were graphed based on the range of the data and with an attempt to clearly demonstrate what the variability of the information is, because there are both higher values and lower values, and I wanted to make sure that it was clear how that compared to the previous data. Because while we have concentrations that are many factors above, as I noted, they're a factor of 3 or more above for the highest values. The April data that is consistent with actually being even greater than the February data. And so I used the scale so that we could really look at the data and be able to compare it to the prior data from the sampling probes.
Okay. going to bring up exhibit B369. I'm going to go to page 17 of the PDF. And then I'm going to rotate the view so that we can see it. All right. Okay. Actually, I'm going to go to page 16 to start. This is PDF page 16 of exhibit B-369. Have you seen this chart before?
Yes, I have.
Okay. And this chart shows the level of soil vapor and the soil vapor monitoring points at tank 15 from what looks like early 2014 up through September 2020. Is that right?
I'm sorry, I'm unable to read the access at this scale.
Sorry about that. Let's zoom in. So all the way over on the left, I read that first data point as 2014-01-30. And then all the way over on the right, I read that last data point as 2020-09-25.
Yes, that's right.
Okay. All right, so I want to bring your attention to what looks like kind of a spike right around 2016, May 23rd, 2016. Do you see that?
I do, yes.
Okay. All right, and would you agree that since that May 2016 spike up to what looks like about 2000, since then the levels have been under 1,000, maybe sometimes above, sorry. This spike in May 2016, looks like about 1,500 plus or minus to me. And since then, the levels have been under 1,000, but mostly above 0. Do you agree?
Yes, I agree.
Okay. And then they've got a zoomed in chart up here, so we can see that last year of data a little better. And in September 2020, does it look to you like the levels in SB15M are getting closer to 1,000?
Yes, and having reviewed the data after the September date, they come back down, consistent with the plot that I provided over the previous several months. So what I take when I look at these is that we're approaching areas where there have been a number of other releases, and this reflects indications of fuel in the subsurface or fuel constituents in the subsurface that we see working through the system and present in the vapor monitoring system.
But you don't know whether the concentrations seen in May 2021 at tank 15 are due to infiltration of tunnel air or other access to those points. Is that correct?
So I think that what's really different about this is that we have a known spill event and that we see not just one location, but that we see many soil vapor probes that all have a response consistent with a time lapse that is reasonable from that event. So while I can't definitively say that it is not any other fuel constituent from a previous release, what I can say is that we see persistent multiple locations beyond just tank 15, which is the one that you're focusing on here, that indicate that there's a change after the May 6th release. And because there is a persistent and consistent over a relatively large space, I can say that it appears that the release from May 6th was released to the environment.
Are the tunnels from which the soil vapor monitoring points at 17, 18, and 20 are accessed, and the soil vapor monitoring points from which tank 15 and 16 are accessed, is there communication between those tunnels?
I believe so.
I'm going to turn to the next page of exhibit 369. see. Let's make sure that's what we've got. Okay. This is a similar chart to the one we just looked at. It's for tank 16 instead of tank 15. And again, we can zoom in on the beginning and end dates. So this chart also starts at around January 30th, 2014. Can you see that date? Is that correct?
Yes, barely, but yes.
Okay. And it ends like the previous one at September 25th, 2020, correct?
Yes, that's right.
Okay. And like the previous one, there's a little spike in the data. Can you see the date there, May 23rd, 2016?
I can clearly see the 2016. I am not so sure that I see May 23rd clearly, but I believe you.
There we go. Okay. All right. And would you agree that since that spike in May 2016 to what looks like about 2000, give or take, the levels at tank 16 have been under 1,000, maybe above 500, but certainly above 0 for the most part. Is that correct?
And yes, that's correct. I don't know about the 500 number. It looks to me it's more like around 250.
Okay. And then again, they've zoomed in on the last 12 months of data. So in September 2020, does it look to you like the levels in SV16 are approaching 500?
I see one point that approaches 500. I see the rest being about 100 and maybe some in the 250 to 350-ish range.
I'm going to turn to the Navy supplemental exhibits again. Going to go to PDF page 227. And I'll change the zoom. All right. This is exhibit N-154A, as you can see marked on the bottom. Of the Navy supplemental exhibits filed on May 27th, 2021. This is a letter dated May 21, 2021. It's addressed to Mr. Keith Kawaoka, Deputy Director of the State of Hawaii Department of Health, and signed by Sherry Eng, Director of the Regional Environmental Department. So I'll scroll down and show. And it is on, whoops, it's on Navy Region Hawaii letterhead. Have you seen this letter before?
Yes, I believe it was submitted to the record as part of
I
the.
have lost sound from Dr. DeNovio. Okay, I'm sorry. I hit the wrong button. Could you repeat your answer, Dr. DeNovio?
Yes, I believe it was submitted, if it's the letter that I think it is, as part of the package that was submitted associated with the May 6th release. It was in the bigger group of documents.
Okay. Could we read into the record the paragraph at the bottom of the first page that starts with the Navy initiated and ends on the next page at post-release?
Sure. The Navy initiated soil vapor monitoring, SVM, in parens, sampling on May 10th, 2021. During the first day of sampling, the sampling team noted that 3 SVM vaults located at tanks 17, 18, and 20 were compromised during post-release washdown efforts. The Navy immediately engaged in cleaning compromised vaults ports and notified DOH of our concerns that the fuel and water mixture had compromised the sampling ports, which may result in elevated results that are a direct result of the cleanup that occurred post-release.
Is it possible that the elevated soil vapor readings at SV 17, 18, and 20 are due to fuel and water entering the soil vapor monitoring vaults or ports during the cleanup that was undertaken after the release?
It is possible, but I will also note that those ports provide a direct conduit to the environment. So if these were indeed compromised, then it's possible as well that these provided a mechanism to release fuel to the environment. And because we see persistent soil vapor monitoring results after all of the tubing and service, as is reported in the record, was made to all of these tank locations, that itself could be a release, and that the data reflect that that was what occurred. Well, that there was a release to the environment, not necessarily that we can tell whether it was you just suggested or some other mechanism. And none of the data, as I understand, that are in the record are prior to this cleaning and replacement of all of the tubing and purging of these sampling locations. So I believe that all of the data that we're looking at for tanks 17, 18, and 20, based on my review of the record, are after these have been serviced.
I'm going to turn to the last page, or the, let's see, I guess it's exhibit B407, the bubble chart that's appended to your testimony.
Mm-hmm.
To look at this most recently added bubble in purple in the lower right-hand corner of the chart.
Yes.
Is the size of this bubble supposed to be proportionate to the volume of fuel that was released to the environment?
It is, although there was a wide variety of different volumes that were reported, and a lack of clarity to me in the record. So I would take this as the best estimate that I saw, which was a couple hundred gallons. But again, the record's very unclear about any sort about the volumes. So the attempt here was to be most representative of the record, but it's a very unclear record.
Can you tell me where in the record you found information indicating that a couple hundred gallons had been released in the environment?
You know, I think there's a place that the Navy says that there was a 700 gallon release and that there were about 500 gallons recovered, but I'd have to go through the pages and pages and pages of emails. So it's in there. It's just, but like I said, it's an estimate.
Is there any way to tell how much fuel was released to the environment, if any, from looking at the soil vapor monitoring data?
So I don't think that we have enough of a record from the soil vapor monitoring data with known volumes of releases to be able to really interpret the PID numbers and given the complexity of the subsurface environment and directly convert that into a volume of fuel released. So unfortunately, that stays as an unknown correlation based on the data that I think we have available to us at this time.
Are there bubbles in this figure that were not present in the previous version of your testimony?
So everything here should be consistent with the last submittal of this figure.
Are the bubbles along the bottom of this chart larger than they were in the previous version of this figure that was submitted in January with your testimony?
Not intentionally. They're just at a size specifically shown so that we can see them. Because the previous version of this plot with the very small releases were hard to see. So they're just shaded so that you can see them.
So these bubbles are not to scale, and the same data points in your previous testimony were to scale. Is that correct?
I think we may be confusing things a bit. So the very first version of this that was submitted to the record, everything was to scale, but many of the values were very small, so they were hard to see. This version, there was a version that was revised, and I'm sorry, I don't know the date, that was submitted to make sure that every event could be crosswalked back. And those bubbles are not to scale so that we can see them. And it is noted here that shaded bubbles are not to scale.
Have you made any other changes to this chart since the version that was submitted in January?
No. I will note that every time I PDF it, it looks ever so slightly different.
And I would like to clarify for the record that we submitted a revised version of this chart in February, as we had discussed during the hearing.
I was not remembering the dates. Thank you.
And so that, I think when Dr. DeNovio was referring to the fact that she didn't change anything, I think she was saying from the revision that was done in February. Is that accurate, Dr.
Yes,
DeNovio?
that's accurate. Thank you very much for clarifying. I'm sorry, I can't remember dates.
All right, so you're testifying that besides the addition of the this purple bubble representing the May 6th release and the change in the size of the very, very small or unknown releases, those are the only changes that have been made since February. Is that correct?
So the only one that I plan to make was the size of the addition of the May 6th release for 2021. If the smaller shaded bubbles appear to be a different size, it was not an intentional change.
Are you the person who updated this figure?
No.
Okay.
You can actually see in the initials. So I did review it, but I did not, like I said.
All right, I think those are the only questions we have for you right now. So thank you again.
Thank you, Ms. Riddle. Mr. Frankel, for.
Thank you. Marnie, can you stop share screen for a little bit? Thanks. I have 3 areas I want to ask you some questions about. You're aware of Curtis Stanley and he was provided testimony in this contested case hearing. Do you remember him?
Yes.
Do you remember reading in his supplemental testimony that data demonstrate that the soil vapor monitoring is effective yet at detecting releases?
Yes, I do.
Do you find it a little odd that the Navy seems to be throwing Mr. Stanley under the bus by challenging the validity or credibility of the soil vapor monitoring data?
You know, I can't conjecture exactly the approach that the Navy is taking here, or whether they're throwing their experts under the bus, as you stated. I would concur that the soil vapor monitoring has been very helpful in identifying releases, and that there's quite a bit of information that's available, especially when we have a known release, like we do in this case, and we can see the extent and persistence of the soil vapor changes, which is very different than only previously having one event to work with. So this helps us to confirm that the soil vapor monitoring system is very capable of detecting and noting releases.
Thank you. Okay, now I realize with my Zoom technology, I'm not going to be able to share the screen since I'm using an iPad and the computer's not going to work. So Hearings Officer Chang, if I can ask you to post on share screen the Navy data, which, or maybe I can ask, it's in the latest set of exhibits from the Navy, but it also the Sierra Club has it as its second document in the supplementation for the record. So I don't know where the best place to find it, but
if you know where the page is in the Navy supplementation, I can bring that up for you, Kima.
What's the one you were just posting? The one with all the data from the soil vapor monitoring that you were.
Okay, let me try.
So if we could, I don't know if you can see, Dr. DeNovio, the fourth line of the chart is May 13th, and that's the day I want to use. I'm looking at the top chart now. Do you see that fourth line is May 13th? Whoops. Can you see that, or do you need it bigger?
I really honestly need it bigger.
I understand. So the fourth line there is May 13th. You see that?
Yes, I do. Thank you.
Okay, now let's, Marnie, if we can go all the way to the right, and we look at SV20 more. Let's keep going. Yeah, there we go. Now, let's go SV. So SV20, that's the name of a monitoring well, right?
It's a soil vapor monitoring location. Yes.
And M stands for medium depth, and D is like deeper. Am I accurate in assuming that?
Yeah, middle depth and deep is, I think, how the Navy refers to them. Yes.
Okay, so let's first compare the fourth line, which again is May 13th. The concentration at the medium depth is a lot higher than the deep one. Maybe one could say an order of magnitude higher, right?
Or two, yeah.
Okay, and now if VOC, what does that stand for again?
Volatile organic carbon.
Okay. Now, if that were distributed, if it sank for some reason, if it was heavier in the air, so it was in the tunnel, and for some reason it was heavier and sank, one would expect the concentrations deep in the monitoring well to be higher than at the medium depth, right?
I don't think that it's quite that straightforward in this case. So we have a very complex environment. We have soil vapor monitoring probes drilled at different similar trajectories, but in different directions, essentially under the tanks. So we're looking at spatial differences beyond just the simplified diagram that we looked at earlier. So I think it depends on exactly how things are related to the exact location of spill, pathways in the subsurface. There's just a lot of different variables here. So I don't know that you can quite compare them with the type of logical direction that you may be trying to go here. We're talking about a fractured rock environment, what's connected to which preferential pathway. So I hope that answers your question.
Sure, sure. So let's look at keep in mind this number. So for the medium depth for SV20 is approximately 232,000. We see that for May 13th, right?
Yes, that's right.
Okay, let's try to keep that number in mind while we navigate, Marnie, below to the background tunnel. Now this is, let's go all the way to the left first, check the date. See how, so again, we have got to go down 4 lines and then let's go across to tank 20. And that's 11,900 in the background readings of the tank, in the tunnel rather. And again, that's more than an order of magnitude lower in the tunnel, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. All right. Now the final area I want to go to is your chart, the bubble chart. So Marnie, if we can go to her bubble chart. Yeah, that's great. Maybe good. So my first question is, you know, these sort of red and pink vertical lines?
Yes.
Can you remind us what those lines are?
So each line represents a release that was of an unknown volume. And there are not different color lines. They're all the same color. The apparent visual change is based on the number of lines that are near each other. So when there are many events, many releases of unknown quantity near each other, they appear darker. And when there are fewer unknown releases spaced more in time, they appear to be lighter lines.
So each of those lines could be circles, but we don't know how big or small they would be, right?
That's correct.
Okay. Now, how do I diplomatically say this? So some have looked at this chart and said, you know what? We can divide the leak history of the tanks into 3 periods. One is, you know, until 1980. A second is 1980 to 2014, and a third is 2014 to 2021. And is that a fair sort of categorization or summarization of the leak history of the tank? Do you see these periods of time as being reflective in this chart?
I mean, I think we can divide anything up by decade if that's what we choose to do. I mean, I would state that it does appear that prior to the mid 1990s, 1980s, yeah, this is small, that there are many more reported events, reported releases than after that. But beyond that, you know, I don't know that breaking it up into different eras is particularly helpful.
Okay. Now, you looked at that quantitative risk assessment study the Navy did. Do you remember that study?
Yes, I do.
And in that study, they talk about acute releases and chronic releases. You know what I'm talking about?
Yes.
And is it fair to say an acute release is from an incident?
Yes, that's right.
And a chronic release is something that steadily occurs over time.
Yes.
So, for example, if a particular tank was leaking 20 gallons of fuel every day, 24, so every day, every week, every month for a period of years, and that was below the detection level that the Navy has, that kind of release would not be recorded in this chart of yours, right?
No, this was really specifically related to an event in the record.
And we do know that there is a level below which the Navy cannot detect releases, right? Chronic releases.
I would say based on my listening of the testimony, that's my understanding, but that's not an area of my expertise.
All right, good. Thank you. I have no further questions.
All right, Mr. Page.
No questions.
Okay. Any redirect, Ms. Gagnon?
Could I have 5 minutes?
Certainly, we've been going about an hour. Maybe we should take about a 10-minute break.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Since I can't see everyone on screen, I'm just checking, are we ready to resume? Is it anybody waiting for somebody who's not on screen? Yeah, I'm
I think so.
gathering then that we are, okay, wait, somebody's coming into the room. Hold on.
Hi, this is Jeff Love.
Okay, good. Hi, Jeff.
Sorry, my computer's not working.
No problem. All right, we're ready to resume. Ms. Gannon. You are muted, by the way.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. Just a follow-up question for you, Dr. DeNovio. When you were talking with Ms. Riddle, she was asking you about the revisions that you made to the bubble chart for this supplemental testimony. Can you again explain what directions you gave to the person in your organization who did the actual graphic works for you?
Yes, I asked him to extend the x-axis to take it past 2020 and far enough that the entire bubble for May 6th, 2021 release could be seen. And then I asked for the May 6th, 2021 release to be added to the chart. So extension of the x-axis to be inclusive of that date and beyond, because if the bubble is too big or gets cut off if you want to take it to the May 6th date. And then just the addition of that one bubble.
And just to be clear, you did not ask them or direct them to make any changes to any of the other bubbles?
No changes to anything else in the plot, bubbles, lines, anything else.
And we were talking about the revisions to the chart that was made earlier. And do you recall discussing this chart when you gave testimony in February at the hearing?
Yes, I do. And I made a number of verbal changes at that point. And then in my testimony that was revised and submitted, I just looked at the date on March 3rd, 2021. This figure was updated and actually enlarged so that it was easier for everyone to see. And so that was the intended figure to be updated.
And that was when you made the change and you said you described the shadowed bubbles that show the areas where they were too small to see on the original chart. Is that correct?
Yes, that's right.
And can you pull up the revised testimony that was submitted on March 3rd?
Yes, I can. I hope everyone can see this.
And is this, can you maybe just go back to the first page of this testimony so we can see what document this is in?
Yeah, let's check. This is page 35.
Make that bigger. So does that look like the revised testimony that we were just discussing that was submitted in March?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, can we go back to page 35 of the PDF?
I'll make that smaller now.
Again, so this was the base chart, which we had those two revisions that you just described made.
Yes, that's correct.
Thank you. I have no further questions.
Okay, any recross from the Navy? Ms. Riddle?
No recross.
Okay, Mr. Frankel?
Nope, thank you.
Okay, Mr. Page?
None.
Okay, thank you. I have some questions, if I may. Dr. DeNovio, you referenced the quantity of fuel released in the May 6th incident as being reportedly between 500 and 700 gallons. I had not seen that figure. The figures that I was aware of was an approximate amount of 1,000 gallons, of which 700 gallons was supposedly captured. Is the bottom line that we do not know the actual quantity of fuel that was released?
I don't recall saying 500 gallons, but I think that the answer to your question is yes, absolutely. I don't think we really understand what the volume of fuel released was. I recall saying 500 was cleaned up, but again, I don't, we would just have to go back and look. But the record has a number of different volumes, and they've sort of changed through the documentation. And I don't think that, based on my reading of the way the Navy did the cleanup, that it would be very easy to figure out the volume of fuel that they were collecting, right? They're using a number of different approaches. So I don't think we know how much.
Okay, as to the mechanism of the leak, it's been stated that it was a pipe sleeve coupling that failed. Do we know the location of that relative to the tank? I'm presuming that it's going to be in a pipeline that emanates from tank 20. So do we know what distance it is from the tank?
I'm sorry, I don't know. That's my understanding as well, that it's approaching the tank. But beyond that, I don't know exactly where it's located.
Coming back to the quantity of fuel released, whether it's 1,000 or whether it's 700, of which supposedly most of it was captured, it is appearing then that the amount of fuel that might not have been captured is in the range of 200 to 300 gallons. And although these are approximate numbers, that's the range. Would that be your understanding?
That's my understanding. Knowing when we're doing estimates like this, it's very difficult to make a visual estimate, figure out size, depth, and we don't have, there was nothing in the record that helped us with that.
In terms of order of magnitude, is it fair to characterize this release as a small release?
I mean, compared to the history, right, that we see in the bubble chart, it's certainly, within the range of other releases that have been noted. It's bigger than some and smaller than others. And so it's certainly small compared to the big releases. But the record has releases that were, I think as small as just a few gallons. So, I would generally say it was not a large release compared to the record.
Now, the soil vapor monitoring is attempting to calculate, I guess, an impact from the release. Would that be a fair statement?
So the way that I think about the soil vapor monitoring is it's an indicator, because it doesn't tell us exactly what constituent. It doesn't tell us what the concentration of that constituent is. It's really an indicator. It's a proxy. So it tells us that there was a release. It tells us that there was a release that was persistent over hundreds of feet that we see throughout multiple monitoring locations. But there's not enough data or information in the record to correlate those soil vapor monitoring concentrations with a known fuel release volume. That's an unknown still.
Okay. On the soil vapor monitoring, is the term wells appropriate, or would that not be appropriate?
A lot of people use different terminology. Wells is okay. I tend to think of wells as things that intersect water. So I always try to make a distinction so that people don't get confused.
All right. And are the numbers of these soil vapor monitoring
locations
elements identified? You have shallow, medium, depth, deep. So under each tank, there's 3. We know the quantity of the soil vapor monitoring elements.
Yes, we know the number of locations that are being monitored. And in one case, one of the soil vapor monitoring probes was clogged earlier in 2020. And so, and that's noted on my figure. And I'd have to just take a quick look at which tank that is. So there's one that we've lost that monitoring location. So we don't have tons of monitoring locations to start out with, but they aren't foolproof. They can become clogged over time.
So physically, what are we? What is a soil vapor monitoring probe? What is it? A core hole drilled?
Yeah.
Is it encased? Is it?
Yeah.
What is it?
So the way these were built was they cored underneath the tanks to try to identify if there had been fuel staining or fuel underneath the tanks. And if you recall from my previous testimony, there's an image of some of that core under one of the tanks that shows that fuel staining. So that's how those borings were completed. They were at an angle from the lower access tunnel. And they were placed at an angle in multiple directions, but from the same point and with multiple depths. So those depths correspond to, about 25, 75, and 100-ish depths for the soil vapor monitoring probe. So essentially, the way that they were constructed is that there's a plug of grout. So there's an open environment at the end of the boring, and where there's a steel tubing that's perforated at the end, so it can collect vapor in contact with the rock in that open area. And then that tubing goes through a grout plug, and that grout plug then separates to the next probe location. So now we have multiple probes, and they're separated by these grout plugs, and then they're accessed in the same port area that we looked at with that steel cover.
So the perforations then are going to be at the depths of 25, 75, and 100.
Nominally, yeah.
So that's where you can get your sampling.
Yeah, so then that's what's open to the rock environment. So that's the native rock beneath the facility. And then there's tubing that extends up into the lower access tunnel with a valve and everything else that sits down in that vault.
So are the soil vapor monitoring probes then all the same that resulted in the coring samples that were done?
That's my understanding, but I will admit that there's not, when I looked at the record on that, that's what's implied in the information, but it isn't explicitly stated. So it's my understanding that that's how they were constructed, was from those previous cores that the soil vapor monitoring probes were installed from those previous coring events, but it's not, like I said, explicitly stated that that's what was done.
Is the orientation of the probes generally vertical, or is it at an angle under the tanks?
They're at an angle under the tank.
So is this 25-7500 a depth from vertical, or is it a length from the point of opening?
Yeah, it's closer to the, so it's not a big angle. So it's, so we're not talking about a big offset, regardless of which direction, but that their offset from that measurement is because it was the nominal distance on the horizontal, but then there's an angle to the boring itself. I'm not sure if I answered your question in a way that.
Well, it's not yet clear. The record indicates that the aquifer level is approximately 100 feet or so below the surface.
Yeah, so they're not vertically.
I'm trying to understand the.
Yes, yeah. So they're vertically not that far beneath, I think, and I'd have to look at the diagram again to know exactly the depth, but it's tens of feet. It's not 100 feet.
Tens of feet what?
Below the bottom of the tank. So it's the deepest one is not quite midway between the bottom of the tank and the top of the aquifer.
Okay, there was something in the record about these borings were at an 11 degree.
Yes, 11, and I think there's one spot that says 14. But yeah, they're at an angle. It's an angled boring beneath the tank with the goal to keep them underneath the tank above the water table.
So then the references of 25, 75, and 100, that's length, not depth. Would that be accurate?
Yes.
Now, what is specifically being measured?
So it's an instrument that is called a photoionization detector. And that photoionization detector looks at the activation of carbon molecules, essentially. And then it has a reference solution. And that reference tells you approximate concentration relative to that reference solution. And the idea is that it's an indicator of volatile organic carbon compounds.
Which is correlated to what you would expect from fuel as it's addressed by the environment.
Yes, that's correct.
Now, these soil vapor monitoring probes then are completely different from what's been identified as RH monitoring wells 1, 2, and 3, right?
That's correct.
Those monitoring wells are different structure altogether that go roughly, generally vertical down to the aquifer levels.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. One thing I'm going to ask you some questions from your report, and let me put the sheet up on screen. Oops. Sorry, I pressed the wrong, didn't select the right document. Okay, now I'm not sure I'm showing your chart because I'm seeing my note to the Zoom audience. I mean, to the YouTube audience. Are you seeing
Seeing your
chart
line graphs. Yeah,
17, 18?
figure 1 and figure 2.
Okay. One observation is that, for example, looking at tank 20, the earlier data points show the high elevation, and looking at the red, the medium depth, and it goes down very quickly.
Mm-hmm.
Is that what is it? What does that indicate?
So it means that there was a high concentration initially when these were sampled, and that high concentration has either migrated away from this location or has diffused or advected. So that means that it's moved out into the rock some distance away. And so the volume, because it's a gas, right? It expands and it gets mixed with the other gas that's in the subsurface. So that fuel, in that case, or fuel constituents, originally were much more concentrated near that probe, and that over time it moves away from the probe. So what we don't know is whether it expanded in volume, so it filled up more locations with a lower concentration, or it found one of those preferential pathways that we've talked about in the rock and moved away from the soil probe location.
Okay. And then the other thing I was looking at is the relationship between the shallow, medium, and deep. And a lay expectation is that you would find more in the shallow, medium in the medium, and less in the deep. But the chart doesn't seem to reflect that. Why is that?
Again, the subsurface here is pretty complex. And so the pathways that we have fuel moving into the environment and then how it's moving once it gets into the environment, I think are poorly characterized. And so we may have a preferential fracture or something like that that's going to that medium probe. So we're seeing a faster, higher concentration arriving there. There's a lot of different mechanisms that could cause something like that. I'll note that as we move further away from the spill location, the relationships seem more consistent at tanks 17 and 18, where we see the shallow probe being greater than the middle probe that's greater than the deeper probe. But so there's some averaging, right, that occurs because you're looking at a larger volume of rock, presumably.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, let me follow up some questions that you were asked by councils. Let me initially thank Mr. Frankel for his sensitivity. than diplomacy. I hope I'm not so thin-skinned that I can't consider all information in an appropriate light. But he raised the question about looking at the bubble chart information. I'm going to call that up. Are you able to see it on screen?
Yes, I am.
Okay. About whether it was fair to look at the data available in different segments. And let me explain what I was trying to do with that. In looking at the bubble chart, it is telling me that we know that a large quantity of fuel over the course of many years has occurred historically before the mid or early 1980s. Okay? The problem is that we don't have much data. We don't have any monitoring, so we don't know much about what's happened to the fuel that was released in terms of its impact underground. So I was trying to take a look at that pre-83, 84 timeframe as one period of time, because after that, and we know that there were implementations of various monitoring tools, and trying to be able to identify the impacts from fuel releases. And we know that there were a lot of system changes in the tank systems. We also have a relatively large release in 2014 at a time when we had much better monitoring data available. And the general observation I was making was that in terms of quantity of fuel released, we only have that one incident in 2014 that is of a significant quantity that presumably we would be more readily able to discover the impacts on the environment. So having said that, do you have a comment about whether that kind of analysis is meaningful or helpful, or is it a false? Will it be a false picture?
So maybe the way that I think I see where you're going, which is that this time frame before the 1980s, and maybe I can just try to paraphrase and you can tell me if I have it, that there's some early time where there's not very much information. There's the 70s through early 80s where there's a number of releases, and they are, of course, cumulative in nature. But there's a big gap in our understanding about those releases because there's no monitoring system that's substantive. Then there's work to implement a monitoring system. I think everyone's aware that my view is that the monitoring system is not very informative locally to the tanks, but there's the implementation of that monitoring system. And then there's a number of releases that occur that are unknown quantities. And so have a hard time understanding them. We have a big release, and that gave us an opportunity to collect some information about what we're measuring and how the monitoring system might work. And so that kind of represents a different evolution of the Red Hill facility. Is that?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And I think that that's fair, in that there is a demarcation of, there was basically almost no monitoring prior to this. So our ability to understand where that fuel is located, if it's still in the subsurface, how it could continue to be a risk, especially as we add these other events, right? So what we don't know is how the event that just happened, the release that just happened, adds to the distribution of fuel that's already there, and how that may create this additive impact. Because there weren't any monitoring locations, there wasn't any monitoring data, and we have a pretty biased set of monitoring and information from this one very large event.
I'm going to take one last look through my notes to see if I have some other questions. If you would give me a moment. Let me raise this topic with you, and if there are objections from any of the advocates, feel free to say so. The nature of petroleum being released to the environment is such that it is subject to volatilization. I don't know if that's a correct word. Because it's volatile, some of it will be absorbed and taken into the atmosphere. Some of it is going to be absorbed by the basaltic materials, and some of it may flow. And then it's also subject to all kinds of bioremediation capabilities. Do we have any understanding as to a time frame, a half-life, anything like that for petroleum products that get into the earth?
So there's a huge amount of published information on this topic, because everyone wants to be able to understand it for their site. And the Navy had done a number of different data collection and modeling efforts to try to understand the half-life here at Red Hill. And you're right, there are a number of different processes. One is, we have vapor that moves and transports, and so some of it may escape to the atmosphere. Some of it moves out through the rocks and stays as vapor. Other places, it's also able to pool. So it collects in the rock and can condense depending on the temperature and moisture characteristics. We can have liquid in the subsurface and in the unsaturated zone. So we can have all of these different processes. And then what that biodegradation rate that you were just talking about can be something that's applied to a whole site. And that's what the Navy had attempted to do. As you heard in our previous discussions, there's a lot of disagreement about what those numbers look like and how they should be applied at the scale of the whole Red Hill facility, because of some of those heterogeneities, because we can have a pool of fuel that maybe the microbes can just access the outside rim of, but maybe can't access the middle of it. So it's going to stay there as a pool of fuel for a much longer period of time. So because we have a complex system that has those fractures, it has all of these different layers, it's much more difficult in a site like this to have that characteristic of this is the one number that applies everywhere. There are some sites that have almost no fuel degradation, and there are some sites that have much higher fuel degradation. And a lot of it is directly impacted by the distribution of the fuel and the distribution of the things that help the microbes grow and respire. And this is a very complex site, especially given the amount of monitoring information that's available to us.
Thank you for trying to explain that. One of your comments earlier suggested that there is a cumulative effect from the history of fuel releases. And so I'm curious about how do we determine the significance of that?
Yeah, and I think that's, unfortunately, you're getting a lot of the same answers from me about that it's complicated. And I do think that, the scale of the facility and the complexity of the subsurface and, the limited monitoring information make that very difficult to understand the cumulative impacts. But we know that when there's fuel in the subsurface and we add more fuel, and we're not sure where it's going, that then increases, our understanding of risk.
All right, thank you very much. Councils, any follow-on questions for Dr. DeNovio?
Yes, I have one or two.
All right, go ahead, Ms. Riddle.
Sure, I'm just going to share my screen one last time. Okay. All right, I've brought up exhibit N136, which was in the supplemental set of exhibits submitted on May 27th. Ms. DeNovio, this is an email from Hugh Myers at DOH to Sherry Eng. Have you seen this email before?
Yes, I have.
All right, the last line of the text of the email refers to a 557-gallon figure. Do you see that?
I do, yes.
Is that figure part of the basis of your estimate that you think something on the order of 200 gallons was released to the environment?
I would, at this point, need to go back through each one of the emails in sequence. But yes, this contributed. But I considered that this was more difficult to understand because it was coming from DOH as opposed to coming from a direct source from the Navy.
Does this email say that 557 gallons was a figure released from the pipe or recovered after the release?
It does not clarify. It says provide information on how the Navy determined that 557 gallons was the release volume update this morning. Like I said, it's not very clear to me in this sentence is exactly what the basis is, whether that's what was cleaned up, whether it wasn't what was cleaned up, and doesn't seem to line up with some of the other numbers.
Is it possible that this was an early estimate of a volume of fuel release?
Absolutely. Like I said, it just, to me, the record's not very clear.
Okay, thank you. I think that's all I have for now.
Okay. Anyone else have questions for Dr. DeNovio? All right. Thank you very much, Dr. DeNovio. Appreciate it. Councils, anything more that councils want to offer, raise, discuss?
I just want to confirm, so our findings of fact, conclusions of law, and final brief are due on Monday, is that right?
Ms. Koski indicates there should be no problem getting the transcript to those of you who want it by Friday of this week. And if that's the case, our schedule does call for the submission of your respective proposed findings and conclusions by Monday the 12th. And Ms. Kasi, I guess, would like to know who all wants that transcript on Friday.
Can I just ask one clarifying question? I thought that your previous order said that it was due 2 days after we got the transcript.
It was. So maybe it's the 13th and not the 12th?
Yes, that was
Is that everyone's understand? That's fine.
Not my understanding, but I understand.
The board would like the transcript.
The Navy will not order the transcript today. Ms. Koski, someone will reach out to you to order that separately. So please don't submit an invoice or send us the transcript until you hear from somebody.
Yep.
Okay. So I guess if others want the transcript, then they'll contact the Rosenberg court reporter firm. Okay.
Mr. Chang, I apologize with my bad connection. Did you give out the Rosenberg's contact info? If not, can you just forward that by email so we can get in touch with her?
Will do. I'll send that in an email to everyone.
Thank you.
All right. We will conclude then the reopened hearings. Thank you very much. Ms. Gannon, you're going to be submitting, I guess, a restated
Yes.
exhibit for Dr. DeNovio's testimony and her revised charts.
Correct.
Okay. All right. Very good. Thank you, everybody. Appreciate all of your assistance with this and look forward to receiving your submissions.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Ms. Gannon, real fast.
But
Ms. Gannon, real fast. So you're the only one ordering a transcript. Do you just want electronic, or do you also want us to send you a hard copy?
You can just send it electronically, it's fine.
Okay, great. And I'll, Mr. Hearings Officer, I'll include you, of course, on the email with the transcript.
all right. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you, everyone.